Hello, fellow bibliophiles, and welcome back to Blatantly Bookish. I'm Marissa, and today I would like to chat about my favorite books that I read in the year of 2023. So 2023 was a very big year for me life-wise, but not so much reading-wise. I read some really wonderful books in the first few months of the year, and then I had my son at the beginning of April, and I've been struggling to get back into a reading rhythm ever since. I only managed to read 21 books this year, which is less than half of what I typically read in a year, but I also read some really fantastic books in that bunch. It's definitely a case of quality over quantity this year. So I thought that I would discuss some of the books that really defined my reading year for me. Oh, and they are not ranked at all this year, so they are in no particular order. The first book on this list is Erotic Stories for Punjabi Widows by Bali Kaur Jaswal. Even though this title sounds like a short story collection, this book is definitely a novel. It's about Nikki, a young Punjabi woman living in West London who reluctantly agrees to go to the Sikh temple to post a listing for an arranged marriage on behalf of her sister Mindy. Even though Nikki wouldn't typically go to the temple and isn't very religious or traditional, she takes a job teaching creative writing to a group of widows there. She soon realizes that the class she is supposed to be teaching was definitely misrepresented to her, and that the women she is supposed to teach don't know how to read or write. But they do want a way to pass the time, and they do have stories that they want to share, most of which, to Nikki's surprise, are about erotic fantasy and desire, a topic that she did not expect from a group of traditional Punjabi women. This book is about modern women navigating the outwardly traditional and conservative community of Southall, London. I love how it explores themes of community and tradition, honor, racism, and the immigrant experience in London, and uses the plot device of the writing class to uncover the sexism and violence that's hiding behind this mask of traditionalism and respectability within this tight-knit community. The book is just so much fun to read. It incorporates aspects of different genres, and I loved how as a reader you slowly begin to understand this community and uncover stories of other women who have been oppressed and abused for not keeping in line with the cultural identity that this community tries to cultivate. There are snippets of erotic short stories, there's murder and romance, and it's all linked together with an overarching novel structure. I read this book back in January of 2023, and it was just such a fun and engaging read, but also one that dealt with serious themes. I felt myself drawn to these characters and this community, and I kept mentally returning to this story throughout the year. The next book is a very well-known book and a very hyped-up book that I think definitely deserves all of the praise it receives, and that is Cersei by Madeline Miller. Cersei is the story of Cersei, a very minor character from the Odyssey who is really just known as the island witch who turns men to pigs. But Madeline Miller takes this little bit of information we get from the Odyssey and turns it into an incredible coming-of-age story. Cersei is a lesser goddess, daughter of the sun titan Helios and the nymph Perse. She doesn't possess any talents or powers, and she lives in the shadow of her more remarkable siblings. But when she is banished to the island of Ayaya, she discovers her own power, her talent for witchcraft, and especially the art of transformation, where she truly excels. This book is a beautiful coming-of-age story that depicts themes of motherhood, love and relationships, and mortality, but it's also an interesting exploration of the power dynamics in the mythologic world. It explores dynamics between the greater gods, lesser gods, nymphs and mortals, between the Titans and the Olympians. It depicts gods who thrive on vengeance and violence and torture, and who only listen to shows of strength and power and threats. It looks at the simultaneous fragility and beauty of humanity and portrays gods who, despite their immortality, embody the worst of humanity and show a remarkable lack of respect for each other and the mortals that worship them. Madeline Miller is such a talented author. She is able to portray all of these different characters and stories like the story of the Minotaur, the fall of Icarus, Medea, and other snippets of the Odyssey, and yet none of these overshadow Cersei's story. Cersei's life becomes its own epic, and it is brilliant. I love everything I have read by Madeline Miller so far. I loved her novel, Song of Achilles, when I read it a few years ago, and she also has a short story called Galatea, which is based on Pygmalion, which I highly recommend as well. Both Galatea and Pygmalion, actually. The one by Bernard Shaw. I've never read the original version. Anyway, I hope Madeline Miller comes out with something else soon because I absolutely love her writing. The next book on this list is one of the strangest and most intriguing books I've ever read, and that is Freshwater by Akwaeke Emezi. It's about a young Nigerian woman named Ada whose identity is fragmented. We follow Ada as they grow up and move to America for college and cope with various traumas related to their fragmented self. The book explains this fragmentation of self as ogbanji, which is a concept in Nigerian culture which is kind of like a changeling. It's this idea that there are mischievous or evil spirits who inhabit people at birth, and that their return to the spirit world is what's responsible for infant deaths. Those children who are inhabited by these spirits and survive infancy are thought to bring about bad luck and sorrow on their parents. So depending on how you read Freshwater, you can view it as a sort of surreal folk tale about a woman infested or possessed by spirits, or you could view it as psychology and as a narrative of dissociative identity disorder. I was blown away by the writing in this book. Emezi has this really captivating writing style that's both very literary but also highly reminiscent of oral folklore and mythology. It has both a poetry to it and the intimacy of someone telling you a story. And then I found the way that this book discusses identity and the formation of the self fascinating, especially since the author identifies as trans and ogbanji. It's hard to know how much of Ada's story is autobiographical or informed by the author's own feelings and experiences, but the whole experience of reading this book for me was intense and deeply thought-provoking, and like nothing I've experienced before. The next book on this list is another very hyped book that I finally got around to reading this year, and oh, am I so glad that I did. It is The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. Taylor Jenkins Reid is an author who I absolutely love, and I couldn't believe that I hadn't read one of her most famous works, but I finally did. The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo is about a famous, now elderly Hollywood icon named Evelyn Hugo, who is ready to open up in an exclusive all about her glamorous and scandalous life. But she's only willing to give this interview to a rather unknown junior magazine reporter named Monique Grant, who she's never met before. Everyone, including Monique herself, is stunned and confused. Why on earth has Evelyn selected Monique, of all people, for this role, and which of Evelyn's 7 husbands was the love of her life? This book was amazing in so many ways. First of all, it reminds me of one of my favorite contemporary books of all time, The 13th Tale. In its premise, a famous person wants to give their story to a rather unknown individual, and in doing so reveals secrets of the past. It's a description that can apply to both books. The two books have a very different tone, though, and wouldn't necessarily appeal to all the same readers. But that connection between the two endeared me to The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo all the more. And then, of course, there's the way Taylor Jenkins Reid writes about fame like no other author I know does. She creates this cult of personality around certain characters that makes me think that they are really famous, that maybe they're a real person I should be looking up, like I do when I read about real people in historical fiction. There were points in this book where I wanted to stop reading and watch some of Evelyn Hugo's old Hollywood films, except they, of course, don't exist. This book not only builds up Evelyn Hugo as a pop culture icon, but it also tears down the persona it's created to reveal the real and complex inner workings of Evelyn Hugo. It's brilliant, really, and everything about Evelyn's characterization in this is stunning. And then there's the plot structure of this book, which is wonderful. There's constant suspense and drama with the underlying mysteries of Evelyn's life, as well as why she's opening up to Monique in the first place, and what that connection might be between them, if there's even any at all. But as much as you're flying through the book, trying to unearth all of Evelyn's secrets, there's this very stable and clear structure in the book grounding you, which is, of course, the 7 husbands. The book is broken down by husband, and as Evelyn recounts the story of each of her husbands one by one, there's a sense of stability and security because you know the story won't end until you get through all 7 of them. And as you're reading it, you keep struggling to see how it will end and which pieces are most vital to create some sort of an ending. This was just such a great book. I think it deserves all the hype it receives, and then some. And last but not least, I wanted to include an important honorable mention on this list. A very special read of 2023 for me was Katie Lumsden's debut book, The Secrets of Heartwood Hall. The Secrets of Heartwood Hall is Gothic Victorian historical fiction about a young woman named Margaret Lennox who takes a position as a governess at Heartwood Hall. It's an isolated house which the townsfolk think is cursed and haunted, and they harbor suspicions and prejudices towards Margaret's employer, another widow named Mrs. Eversham. Margaret isn't one to listen to the townsfolk, but even she starts to feel that something isn't quite right there. There are strange figures in the dark, tensions between servants, and a mysterious abandoned East Wing. And as Margaret's relationships with the staff and her pupil deepen, it becomes clear that everyone at Heartwood Hall has secrets, including Margaret herself. I did a whole review of this book back in February if you want to hear more about the book itself. But I wanted to talk a little more about the reading experience and why it's sort of in a different category than favorites. Thanks to BookTube, the author, Katie, has become a very dear friend of mine, and having the chance to read her first published novel was such a unique and meaningful experience. It's really hard for me to think about this book alongside any other book I've read because it's such a singular experience to read a novel written by someone I know personally. Getting to see the twists and turns and how they line up with what I know of Katie's taste in novels, having in-depth discussions with the author about the book both before and after reading it, that's something completely new to me. It's like nothing I've experienced before and was definitely a defining moment in my reading year. So that's all I have for you today. 2023 was a strange reading year for me, for sure, but I also read some really special and wonderful literature. I would love to know in the comments down below if you've read these books, what you thought of them, and if they made your favorites list. What were some of your favorite reads of 2023? And do you think I'd like them as well? Until next time, I look forward to seeing you in another bookish video very soon. Bye!